Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable, let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. A man finished a sentence for me that another man had started 31 years earlier. He picked it up in the middle of a word. That is the whole story, I suppose. And the rest of this is just me walking you around it, the way you walk around a car you're thinking about buying. My name's Garland. In 1963, I was 26 years old, and I pumped gas at my father's station on Highway 30 outside Paxton, Nebraska. And by 1994, the station was mine, and the pumps were still mine, and the sentence found me at both ends of that stretch like a piece of wire with a post at each end. I should tell you about the station first, because the station is most of what I am. 2 pumps under a porcelain shade light, a bell hose across the drive, a register, a rack of fan belts, and a day book on a nail. My father kept the day book and I kept it after him. Gallons, quarts, plugs, patches. Weather in the margin if the weather did anything worth ink. I have every one of those books to this day, shelved by year in the back room of my house, and I can tell you what I pumped on any Tuesday of 1963. And I am not a man who rounds up. I want that understood early. My trade ran on small, honest numbers, and my memory was part of the equipment. There was one other piece of equipment, and it was a parlor trick. 40 cars a day came over that bell hose, and by the second word out of a driver's window, I generally knew the rest. Directions, the restroom key, how far to Ogallala, whether the cafe in town was any good. I would have the answer moving before the question landed. My father called it showing off. Probably it was. But you stand at a pump island long enough, you learn that people only have about 9 sentences, and you learn to hear which one is coming the way you hear which way a rig is going to turn by the set of its front tires. I finished sentences for a living, quietly, inside my own head. Remember that. It matters at the far end. Now, the Tuesday. In late September of '63, there was an evening when I watched a light cross the sandhills, south to north, low and slow, for about 11 minutes. Orange, steady, no sound that reached me. It was not an aircraft the way I knew aircraft, and we got aircraft, we got crop dusters, and we got the airline stuff high up. And this was neither, and I stood by the pumps with a quart of oil in my hand and watched it the whole way across. It did not do anything. It went. When it was gone, the crickets were still going and the highway was still empty, and I put the quart back on the rack and told nobody. A man who tells that story in a town like Paxton buys himself a nickname, and I had a station to inherit. 2 nights after, at dusk, a dark sedan came over the bell hose. Ding, and then the second ding unhurried. I remember thinking the car rolled in quieter than it should have, and I remember putting that down to a good engine, and I remember that I had not heard it coming up the highway at all, which I did not think about then and have thought about since, because on that road you heard every car for a mile in both directions. You heard them the way you hear weather. That car was at my island, and the highway had been silent right up until it was. 2 men got out. Dark suits, and this was '63, so men wore suits, but these were behind the times some way I could not have named then. Maybe 10 years. Hats, when hats were starting to go. They were polite in a fashion that was older than the suits, a kind of roundabout courtesy, the way men talked in my grandfather's stories. They did not want gas. The shorter one asked me, in the most sideways way you ever heard, whether I had happened to mention my Tuesday evening to anybody. Those were not his words. His words came at it the way a man comes at a horse he does not want to spook. But that was the freight they carried, and I understood him fine. I said I had not. I remember I was not afraid. I want to be honest about that. There was nothing in either of them that pushed at you. It was more like being read gently by somebody who already knew the book. Then the taller one started a sentence. I have carried it word for word for the rest of my life, and here is the whole of what I got. He said, if anyone should ask you about it, it would be simplest to tell them. And there he stopped because the shorter one touched his sleeve, 2 fingers, light as putting down a card, and both of them turned their heads and looked up the highway. A cattle truck went by, eastbound, loud, trailing that smell, cattle truck's trail. And when it had gone, the 2 of them seemed to have agreed on something without saying anything. And they thanked me for my time, and they got in the sedan and pulled out. And I stood there holding the end of nothing. You want to know what that does to a man like me? I finish sentences. It is the one thing I am better at than anybody I know. And I stood at my own pump island, running the ending every which way. Tell them it was a weather balloon. Tell them you saw nothing. Tell them to speak to us. I built a dozen endings that fall and 100 over the years, and I never could get one to sit flat, because I had heard the shape of where he was going, and none of my endings had that shape. It was like having 8 bars of a tune and no way home. I wrote 1 line in the daybook that night. 2 gents, no gas, asked about Tuesday. I did not write the sentence. I suppose I thought that if I did not write it down, it would quit itching. It did not quit. And the light never came back, and nobody ever did ask me. And that is the other thing I want, said plainly. 31 years, and not one soul ever asked me about that Tuesday. The ending I was given no use for was an ending to a conversation that never happened. Keep that in your pocket. The years went the way years go at a gas station. My father passed in 71, and I buried him and kept the books the same. I married Lurleen in 66, and she will tell you I talk in my sleep and never once said anything interesting. And I believe her. The interstate came through south of us and took the through traffic, and the highway got quiet, and I hung on, because a corner you own free and clear is a corner you own. 63 got old. The 2 men got old too, in my head, the way everything filed in a man's head ages along with him. I figured them for statemen or airbase men or insurance men of some strange kind, and I figured wrong. But it was a comfortable kind of wrong, and I lived in it a long time. Now it is a Thursday evening in June of 1994. I am 57. The pumps are self-serve by now and the bell hose is years gone, but I still hear my arrivals, because the ear does not retire just because the equipment does. And this is the part where I have to go slow, because the order of things matters. I did not hear a car. That is first. I was at the register with the door propped for the breeze, and the highway had that late sound it gets, which is no sound, and then there was an engine at my island that had not come up the road to get there. And the engine was wrong in the other direction. It was a sound I had not heard since I was a young man. A big, lazy 6 with a fan clutch, valves you could count, a sound with fins on it. My first thought, and it was a good first thought, was a collector. Denver plates, some retired dentist trailering his baby east for a show and letting her breathe on the 2-lane. We got them every summer, and I came out wiping my hands, ready to admire it, which is what those men stopped for. It was a sedan of about 1962, and here is where the admiring died in my mouth. It was not restored, I know restored. Restored is a word for old made to look new, and there is always a tell. The too deep shine, the wrong hose clamp, the modern glass. This car was not old made new. It was new, Factory paint the way factory paint sat in those years. A little orange peel in it, honest. New rubber with the mold whiskers still on the sidewalls. And through the open window, the smell. New upholstery, that vinyl and horsehair smell that went out of the world before my kids were born, coming off that seat as fresh as bread. I stood there with the rag in my hands, and something in the back of my head began to move its feet. The doors opened and the two men got out, and I will tell you the order my mind took them in, because it took them in rungs, like a ladder I was being walked down. The suits first, dark, pressed, and out of date, and I want to be exact here. Not out of date like old men wear. Out of date the same distance out of date they had been in '63. Whatever year those suits were behind, they were still exactly that far behind. And my arithmetic could not make that work, and I let it go, because the shorter one had started to speak, and the voice took me next. I have replayed that voice for 31 years, the sideways kindly freight of it, and a memory that old drifts. Mine had not, and I know that because the voice matched it. Matched it clean, no seam, the way a record matches itself every time you drop the needle. And then the faces, and this is the rung where I stopped going down the ladder on my own, and the ladder just carried me. They were not sons. I had that thought, and it was a good thought, and I will get to it. But faces age even in photographs somehow. They take on the years of the looking. These two had not. The same faces. And on the taller one, under the jaw, left side, the same razor nick I had noticed in '63, a little red comma I had never told one living person about, because who tells about a razor nick? It had not healed, it had not moved. 31 years, and that nick was the same age it had always been, and so was everything else about them. And there I stood, aged the whole distance myself, holding a rag. I want to give the sun's theory its full minute, because it held me up for most of one, and I was grateful to it. Men dress like their fathers, I told myself. Men inherit cars and keep them garaged and mint. Men inherit work, too, and if the first pair had been from some quiet office, then maybe the office ran in families, and these were the boys, raised in the trade, driving Daddy's car on Daddy's route. It explained the suits and the sedan in one stroke, and it very nearly explained the faces if I did not look straight at the nick, and I was still arranging the furniture of it quite happily when the shorter man came up to me and said my name. Which is on the sign, I told myself. It is painted on the sign. That is all that is. And then, with no more preamble than a man stepping back into a room he had left to fetch his coffee, in the taller man's exact place in that old duet, he finished it. That it was a weather balloon out of the Scottsbluff office, and no more to it. Picked it up in the middle of the word. Tell them, the taller one had said in '63, and stopped. That it was a weather balloon, this one said in '94, and the joint between the two halves was not a joint at all, same breath rhythm, same easy delivery, like the second half of a sentence interrupted by a passing truck, which I suppose to him is what it was. And the wrongness of it was not loud. I want you to understand that. It did not crash in on me, it settled, the way dusk settles, everywhere at once, and no one place you could point at. My parlor trick, the one thing I do better than anybody, had been sitting up on its hind legs since the man opened his mouth, and it had given me nothing. For the only time in my life a sentence had come at me that I did not see coming, and it was 31 years old, and it was aimed. I do not remember deciding to nod. I nodded. The shorter man seemed satisfied, the way a man is satisfied when he has at last delivered a package that has ridden too long in the truck. And then both of them looked at the highway, east and west, the way they had the first time, and I caught myself listening for the cattle truck. No truck. Nothing moved at all for a while. The sodium light hummed. A moth went around it. 2 men and a new old car and me, and the highway lying there empty in both directions like something that had been told to lie still. There was a rancher at the other island about then, airing a tire, and I hold on to him because he proves I was awake. He nodded at the 2 men and got a courteous nod back, and weeks later at the co-op I asked him, easy as I could, about the fellows in the suits that evening. Salesmen, he figured. 2 suits and nothing else stuck to him. That is all they left on a man who had no history with them. I had history, and what they left on me you are listening to. They thanked me for my time. The same phrase as before, those same words, and the taller one, who in 2 visits and 31 years had spoken half of 1 sentence to me, rested 2 fingers on the pump island for a second, right where the old bell hose used to cross, though there is no mark there now, nothing to see, no reason for a stranger's hand to find that spot. Then they got in the sedan and I looked down, I could not tell you why, at the daybook I still keep on its nail out of pure stubbornness, and when I looked up the highway was empty in both directions, and I had not heard them go. Both visits the same, never heard them come, never heard them leave, on a road where sound is the whole of the law. That night I went into the back room and took down 1963. The books stand in a row, spines faded in order, 63 no more faded than it ought to be. I found the Tuesday, and then I found the Thursday after, and there was my line, in my own younger hand, ordinary ink gone ordinary brown. 2 gents, no gas, asked about Tuesday. I sat with it a while. The record was honest, the way my records are honest, and it helped me not at all. It proved the beginning of a sentence, and now I had the end, and between the 2 halves sat 31 years of my one life, which had happened to me and near as I can tell, had not happened to them. I locked up early, which Lurley noticed and did not remark on, she being the kind of wife a man in my position ought to have. I never told her the whole of it. I am telling you because you are half asleep and far away, and that seems about the right distance for this story. The pumps came out in 2001. The tanks are filled with sand, which is the law now, and the corner is just my corner, with the light still up because I pay to keep it up. But I own it yet, and evenings I still sit out there some, and here's what remains of all of it, the residue at the bottom of the glass. When a dark sedan slows on the highway, any dark sedan, I find that I've already begun composing the end of a sentence that nobody has started. It runs in me before I can stop it, the old trick pointing the wrong way down the road. Weather balloon out of Scottsbluff, I think, and no more to it. Maybe I misheard him the first time, all those years ago, and built the rest myself, the way a man will. But then again, maybe not. For 22 years I wound a watch that was always already wound, every Friday. I have the log. My name's Isidore, though the street called me Izzy, and I repaired watches on Howard Street in Baltimore from just after the war until my hands told me to stop. This is the story of Hook 11, and I will tell it the way I would strip a movement, one piece at a time, in order, on clean felt. You should know what kind of man is talking to you. My trade is error. A watch that loses 5 seconds a week is, to me, a scandal, and I have spent whole afternoons chasing 4 of those seconds through a hairspring. A man who measures his life in 5-second errors does not misremember 22 years. When I tell you a thing happened on a Friday, it happened on a Friday. When I tell you the crown did not turn, it did not turn. You understand? The shop was narrow. A lathe by the window for the light, felt pads, the smell of benzene and pegwood, and on the wall behind the counter a board of numbered hooks where customers' watches waited. Held watches got wound every Friday, last thing. Counted turns entered in a log by hook number, so that no watch ever went back to its owner run down. That was my father's system. And his ticket system, too. Every claimed ticket torn on the diagonal, half to the customer, half on the hook. A diagonal tier never matches any tier but its own. Paper remembers how it was hurt. My father said that, and I thought it was just a thing he said. I think differently now, I suppose. It was February of 1955, the dead half hour before closing, the street going home around the streetlights. Mr. Feldman, next door, the shoe man, had already knocked the wall goodnight, 2 knocks, and I had knocked back, which was our whole friendship and a good one. I was at the lathe, and when I looked up, 2 men were standing at my counter, and I had not heard the bell. I want to stop on the bell because everything I have to say is in the bell somewhere. It hung over my door 40 years. I oiled nothing in that shop so faithfully. It rang for everyone. It rang for the mailman. It rang for the wind. It rang, near as I could tell, for thoughts of the door. It did not ring for these 2. Not that evening, and not, but I am getting ahead. Dark suits, and I knew suits. My cousin was in that business. These were good cloth and 1 decade stale, and the hats were in their hands, indoors, which was a courtesy from before my father's time. They set a pocket watch on my felt, an open face, plain as a dinner plate, and I did what I do. I put up my loop and went in. Clean, jeweled properly, serviced by somebody who knew his work, and keeping, so far as I could measure it against my rack that evening, perfect time. Not good time. Perfect. I said there was nothing in it for me to do, and the shorter one said, in a soft old-fashioned way that took the long road around, that they wished it held. Not repaired. Held. They would come back for it when it was convenient. He said that twice, the same words, when it is convenient, and I have had a long time to wonder which of us the convenience belonged to. A holding fee was paid, in bills that looked ironed, more than the watch was worth if you priced it as metal. I tore the ticket on the diagonal, gave them their half, hung the watch on hook 11, and entered it in the log. They thanked me and were on the sidewalk before I understood I had not heard the bell the second time either. I told my wife that evening that 2 men had paid me good money to store a watch that needed nothing. She said, some people, and we let it be, because in a trade like mine, some people is half the ledger. Now the Fridays. The first few, hook 11 took its counted turns like any watch, or I believed it did, which I have thought about, whether a man can feel turns that are not there because his fingers expect them. By the 6th Friday I could not pretend, the crown would not take a turn, fully wound. A held watch, wound by nobody, full to the stop. I assumed the obvious, which is that I had miscounted the week before, and I entered 0 turns and initialed it, a little cross with myself. The next Friday, 0. The Friday after, 0. For the better part of a year I blamed my log, which tells you something about me. I would sooner believe I had gone soft in the head on schedule, every 7 days, than believe a mainspring. So I opened it. You would have too. I expected one of 2 things: a self-winding conversion, some rotor bootlegged in under a false plate, or a fraud. A case with no works and a dial run off something hidden. What I found was an ordinary hand wound movement, ordinary bridges, ordinary click, a mainspring barrel like 10,000 others I have had under my fingers. Nothing under the dial but watch. I closed it up, and I'm not ashamed to say I closed it up quickly, the way you close a door on a room that is somehow the wrong room, though every stick of furniture in it is correct. After that, I did what a man of my temperament does. I measured. Nights, for a month, I checked it against the radio time signals, the ones that tick out of the static at midnight if you know where the dial goes. It did not gain, it did not lose. Not a second, not the shadow of a second. And I will tell you plainly, there is no mechanical watch in this world of which that is true. A watch is a small argument between a spring and a wheel, and every argument drifts. This one had no drift, the way the men had no wrinkles in their courtesy. I stopped measuring after a month. I have asked myself why I stopped, and the honest answer is that the numbers were beginning to feel like looking at something through a keyhole, and I did not want to see it turn around. The years after that were quiet, which is its own part of the story. Hook 11, 0 turns. Friday after Friday, my hand writing the 0, and my mind stepping around it the way you step around a loose board you have given up on fixing. 22 Februaries came through the glass. The trolleys went and the buses came, and their sound through the window was wrong for years until it was normal. Mr. Feldman retired and the wall stopped knocking back, and I missed it more than I can say in a story about other things. My son grew up and did not want the shop, which broke my heart the ordinary amount. The amount every man on that street was broken. I mention all this because it is what 22 years is. It is trolleys and walls and sons. It is not nothing. It happened to me. Hold that thought against what comes. February of 1977, the dead half hour before closing. I was at the lathe because I was always at the lathe, and the light through the window was that low early winter light that is the best light of the year for work. And when I looked up, they were at the counter. No bell. I am going to go slowly here, the way I went slowly then. The hats were in their hands. The suits were dark and good and 1 decade stale. And here is what I need you to sit with, because I sat with it. Not stale like men who had kept their old suits. Stale by the same distance as before. In 55, they were dressed for about 1945. In 77, they were dressed for about 1967. The gap had traveled with them, like a man walking with his own lamplight. I can think of no honest tailor who could arrange that, and believe me, I have tried to hire him in my head many times. The faces were the faces. I say that flatly because that is how it arrived, flatly, like a reading off an instrument. 22 years is a workbench of a distance. It files at everybody, and it had filed at me plenty. I was gray, and my hands had begun their little tremor. On them, it had done nothing that I could find, and a watchmaker looks. The same faces, the same steadiness, the same way of standing that suggested they had nowhere further to be, ever. For the length of one breath I had my answer, and it was a good answer, and I offer it to you at full price. The firm sent the next men. Whatever the firm was, estates, lawyers, some trust winding through the courts at the speed trusts go, it had sent the successors, and the resemblance was coincidence assisted by hats. Men in hats look like a year, not like themselves. My mouth was actually forming the words, "Your predecessors left an item," when the shorter man laid his half of the ticket on my felt, and the breath ended, and the answer went where answers go. Paper ages on a wall, mine had. My half, on hook 11, had gone the color of weak tea, curled a little, taken the shop into itself the way paper does. His half was white at the crease, supple, the diagonal sharp as the afternoon my father's scissors made their last cut before I inherited them. I put the halves together because that is the ritual, and my hands did it without me, joined them, turned them over, joined them again. The tier matched. Of course it matched. A diagonal tier never matches any tier but its own. It matched the way his voice matched my memory of his voice, seamless, and somewhere in me a door I had held shut since Eisenhower swung quietly on its hinge. I lifted the watch down, and because a handover has its courtesies too, I went to give it the 3 turns you give a watch before it crosses the counter. A small thing, a politeness of the trade. The crown gave me nothing. Full, wound to the stop by nobody, 22 years deep, the same as every Friday, and the taller man watched me discover it one last time with something on his face that I would have called sympathy on a person. Then he said the only thing either of them said that evening that was not old-fashioned business, and I have carried it since. Thank you for keeping our time, not the watch, the time. And I stood there with my empty hook and my 2 matched ticket halves which they left me, along with the balance of the holding fee in ironed bills, and they went out. And the bell that rings for the wind did not ring for them, and the street took them the way the street takes everybody. Except that when I got to the window, which I am not ashamed to say took me a few seconds, the sidewalk was empty in both directions, and Howard Street does not empty in seconds. I have timed it. Of course, I have timed it. You understand by now what kind of man is talking to you. The log stayed. 22 years of Februaries and all the months between, hook 11, a column of zeros in my own hand, and each zero initialed, because a record is a record. My grandson found the book once, years on, turning pages with his cocoa beside him, and asked me what all the zeros were. A very reliable customer, I told him, and he accepted that, because children can smell which questions have floors under them and which do not. I kept the shop until my hands retired me, and at home I keep a small board, a few hooks, watches of my own, and I wind them Fridays last thing, lights off in the front room, because a ritual is a watch you wind with your whole body. But I keep one hook empty, third from the left. My wife thought it was for a watch I meant to buy, and I let her think so, and now that she is gone I can say plainly that I do not know what it is for. It is for whatever is not finished. Maybe that mainspring was some prototype, some alloy that wandered out of a laboratory ahead of its paperwork, and I simply never knew what I had on my wall all those years. I would like that. I could retire the whole business into that. But the ticket was white at the crease, and the bell never rang, and near as I can tell, the only one of us in that shop that time ever happened to was me. So, maybe, but then again, maybe not. A book came back to me 41 years overdue, and the men who returned it had not aged a day, and the book had not either. My name's Verdi. In 1961, I was 24 years old, and I ran the bookmobile for the county library in Breathitt County, Kentucky, up in the eastern mountains. And if you never saw a bookmobile, it was a school bus converted over to shelves, and we called it the unit because the county called it the unit. And I drove the hollows with it every week of my young life. I ought to establish myself before I tell you what I saw, because that is only fair. I logged every loan that unit ever made, and later every loan across the branch desk, 38 years in the system all told. You could ask me what Breathitt County read in any given October, and I could come close. Dates and titles sit in me the way kin sits in other people. And I will tell you my other habit, which matters later. Every book that came back, I smelled. That sounds peculiar said out loud, but the hollows are damp, and mildew travels shelf to shelf like gossip, and a librarian who cannot smell trouble in his spine will lose a collection by Christmas. Stamp, card, thump, and a smell. That was my whole liturgy, and I performed it maybe 100 times a Thursday. Thursdays were my long route, and the last stop was a crossroads store between two hollows, where the children would be waiting on the porch with their returns, and Mr. Sizemore, my driver, would go in for his bottle drink and his 20 minutes, timed by a pocket watch he called the county clock. October of '61, late in the stop, the children gone home to supper, the light going gold and long. I was alone in the unit, shelving, when two men came up the steps. The steps flexed for everybody. They were bus steps. They complained about the third child of any family. I did not hear them complain, is a thing I noticed without noticing. The way you pocket a button you find and discover it years later in a coat. Dark suits, hats which they took off inside the unit, in a converted school bus at a crossroads, as though the shelves made it a parlor. Their shoes were wrong for that mud and were not muddy. Everything about them was wrong for the crossroads and right for some street I had never been on, and their manners were older than both, roundabout and gentle, the kind of courtesy that makes you feel your own manners have been resting. They wished to see the county atlas. We carried it, the big cloth one, plats and hollows and creek names, reference only by rights, the one book that never left the unit. And the shorter one asked so mildly whether they might borrow it and return it themselves, that the rule stood there in my mouth feeling ungracious, and I heard myself say that I suppose the county could spare it a week for careful hands. He thanked me, and then he said the thing I have turned over more times than any sentence ever said to me. He said that I needn't mark it overdue, however long it might take. However long it might take, I had not raised fines. I never raised fines with grown men in suits. I stamped the card, my own hand wrote the date, October something of 61, and my own hand put the card in my file and the pocket back in the book, and they thanked me and went down the steps, which again said nothing, and walked away down the quicksand road. Now, the quicksand road runs better than a mile in open sight from that crossroads before the timber takes it, and the store porch faces it, and the porch was not empty. Porches there never were. Mr. Sizemore came back with his drink inside his 20 minutes and met nobody on that road. Nobody on the porch saw a car all afternoon, and a car at that crossroads was an event. It got discussed. 2 men in suits walked down an open road in plain evening light, and between the unit and the timber, so far as any soul in that county could testify, they stopped being anywhere. I did not frame it that way then. I framed it that I had missed seeing where their car was parked. You can live a long time in a frame like that. I lived 41 years in it. The atlas did not come back. I will not drag you through every year of my waiting, but understand that a missing reference book is, to a librarian, a low note that never resolves. For a season, I expected it at every stop. Then I expected it at the branch, where I moved when the county cut the route. Then it became my cautionary tale, the one I told children with their first cards about the county's atlas that walked down the quicksand road, and the children's eyes would go round, and I would stamp their Nancy Drew, and life would go on. The unit itself was retired in 1974 and cut up for scrap, which I watched a little of and did not care for. The county got a van. The van never smelled right. The unit had a smell I could have picked out of 100. Diesel warmed up through the floorboards, paste wax, brown paper, old bindings, a smell like a warm, dry morning inside a book. It faded out of my cardigans by 75 or so, and out of the world entirely, I would have said. Hold that. I should say, too, what I did not do in all those years because it is the part I am least proud of and most sure about. I never reported it stolen. The form existed. I filled that form for lesser books, for a bird guide and a Zane Grey, and I could not make my pen do it for the atlas. And if you asked me why, the closest I can come is this. He had said, however long it might take, and some small stubborn clerk inside me had accepted those terms on the county's behalf, and a loan on accepted terms is not a theft. It is only long. The accession ledger is in the branch basement to this day, and the atlas's line was never closed out. It sits there open in my ink, like a door I propped and forgot I propped. I retired in '99, and in the spring of 2002, the Friends of the Library held their book sale in the Fellowship Hall of the Baptist Church, the way they do every spring. Rain on the gravel lot, coffee urn going, folding tables of donations sorted the way I sort them. Because of course I work the sale, I have worked every sale, I run the cash box and I wipe the donated spines with a damp cloth. And I am telling you the smell of that hall, so you will believe me about the other smell. Old paper losing politely to church coffee. That is a fellowship hall in April. I looked up from the cash box, and the two men were standing at the Atlas and Bible table. And I want to be honest about my first thought, because it was not fear, and it was not even wonder. My first thought was the correct shelf position of a book I had last touched in October of 1961. R for reference, 917 for the geography, the county's own accession number inked at the foot. The mind of a librarian is a filing system that does not consult her before it runs. The second thought was the suits, and the second thought had arithmetic in it. Those suits had been about a decade behind the times in '61. Here is what nobody prepares you for. They were still about a decade behind the times, but behind these times now, behind 2002. The out-of-dateness had come forward with them, like a shadow that keeps its length at every hour of the day, and I stood at my cash box doing sums that would not come out, and while I did them, the shorter man picked up nothing from the table, because what he wanted he had brought, and crossed the hall to me, and set the county atlas down on my table. Cloth unfaded, corners square. The reference sticker mine, the accession number mine, inked at the foot in my own branch's ink. Now I had a theory arrive right then, unbidden, the way a neighbor arrives with a casserole, and it was a good theory, and I let it feed me. Estate sale. Some family up some hollow had it the whole time. The grandfather borrowed it or bought it off a scrap man, and he has died, as grandfathers do, and the family cleared the hall table into a box, and the box came to our sale. And these two gentlemen are lawyers or funeral men who found it and are returning it. And the resemblance to two men I met one October evening as a girl is what 41 years does to a memory assisted by two hats. I have met 100 men who looked like these men. Every one of them was at a funeral or a courthouse. That theory carried me right up until my hands, which had gone ahead on their own, opened the back cover, and my thumb found the card in the pocket. And I looked down at the top line and saw my own handwriting. 24 years old, round and hopeful. The ink black as the Thursday it went down. And under my one line, 41 years of blank. And then the smell reached me. Mid-motion, rising off the pages the way heat rises off a road. Diesel warmed through a floorboard. Paste wax, brown paper. The inside of the unit, the whole warm, dry morning of it, present tense, in a fellowship hall in April, off a book that had been God knows where, coming off it like the book had been shelved in that bus yesterday. The unit was cut up for scrap in 1974. I stood in the coffee and the rain noise and smelled a vehicle that has not existed for 28 years, and I did not say one word, because there were no words in the building for it. I heard myself start my sentence. The fine sentence, the one I said kindly to children for 30 years, about how we would call it even if. And the taller man, who had not spoken in either century, said, "It is not overdue. You said you would not mark it overdue, which is true," which was said by me to him alone at a crossroads in October of 1961, and had been heard by nobody else on this earth, and he returned it to me across 41 years with the mild patience of a man reminding you of an arrangement made last Tuesday. I marked nothing. There was nothing to mark. The loan was, by its own terms, in good standing. He put $1 in the friend's coffee can, which I watched his hand do, an ordinary hand, and the two of them thanked me, put on their hats at the door the way men used to, and went out into the rain, and I did not go to the window. I want you to know that I thought about it, and I did not go, because whatever the gravel lot had to show me, I had my inventory, and a librarian trusts her inventory. I bought the atlas from the friends myself, a dollar, which felt important, money changing hands the right way around. It sits on my shelf at home. The smell faded over a season, the way it faded from my cardigans the first time, as though the book had at last consented to arrive in the present along with the rest of us. The due card I keep where it always was, in the pocket, my one line at the top, the blank lines under it going down the card like years the book declined to have. I still work the sale every spring. I still run my damp cloth down the donated spines, and I still smell every book, out of liturgy now more than fear of mildew. But every atlas that crosses that table, I open the back cover first, before the title page, and I rid the pocket, and my grandniece thinks it is a charming habit of an old librarian, and I let her think so. Maybe some family did keep it 41 years in a cedar chest, and cedar held the diesel somehow, and grief made me see October in two men's faces. That is the explanation I shelve it under most days, but then again, maybe not. Two men walked into my diner in 1986 and ordered something I had carried on a window tray in 1958, and they said it like the kitchen had been holding their ticket the whole time. My name's Levon. I have fed people on the same corner of Admiral Boulevard in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for most of my life. First as a carhop at the drive-in that stood there, later as the owner of the diner that replaced it, and I will tell you right off what my gift is, because the story runs on it. I remember orders. I have carried 6 cars worth without a pad and never crossed a French fry. You learn a face by what it eats. My memory was the one thing in that place that never once needed repair. And I say that having replaced the roof twice. The trick of it, and I have never told this to anybody but my daughter, is pictures. I file every order as a little picture. Don't laugh. A cheeseburger, no onions, extra pickle. That might be a fat man sitting on a fence eating a dill. 2 black coffees and a slice of peach pie. I filed that one on a June evening in 1958, and the picture was 2 crows on a fence rail looking at a sunset. Silly, private, and infallible. Hold on to the crows. They come back. 1958. I was 17, in the paper hat and the change belt, working the last cars of the night. If you never saw our lot at Blue Hour, I am sorry for you. The neon script came on against a sky the color of orange soda, and 40 rolled-down windows murmured 40 different radio stations, and the June bugs orbited the neon like little drunk planets. Into all of that, one evening, came a dark sedan that had no business at a drive-in. Formal. Washed like a hearse. It took the end stall in my section, and the 2 men in it wore suits and kept their hats on in the car, and when I hooked the tray on the glass, the shorter one ordered 2 black coffees and 1 slice of peach pie, in a voice with manners on it from some older year, and that was fine, that was nothing. Food is food. They did not touch it. Any of it. I cruised my section the way you do, and the cup sat full and the pie sat pointed, and the 2 of them sat talking quietly to one another, hands folded, like men waiting in an office of some kind, if an office had carhops. When I came to collect, the shorter one asked me, mild as milk, whether I had happened to see the lights folks had been talking about over the fairgrounds the week before. Now, there had been talk. My boss, Mr. Tarwater, had gone on about it. Half the county had an opinion that week. But I had worked that night and seen nothing but taillights and ketchup, and I said so. And the man nodded, like that was useful too, which I remember thinking was a strange thing for a no to be. Then, when I lifted the tray, the taller one spoke, the only time he spoke. He said, "We will want the same order next time." And the tip was exact and kind, and the cups were still full and still warm, which I noticed against my wrist as I carried the tray in, and did not think about again for 28 years. The sedan was gone by the time I looked. I had not heard it start, but a drive-in at 9 on a June night is 40 radios and a milkshake machine, and you could lose a freight train in it. And that is the truthful account of why I noticed nothing more. I was 17. The picture filed itself. 2 crows on a fence rail, sunset. Next car. I finished my shift that night the way I finished every shift, unloading trays, counting my change belt on the prep table, while the cook scraped the grill in 4/4 time with the radio off. I remember I told him about the coffee men, because 17-year-olds narrate their whole evening, and he said, rich people, and flipped the scraper. And that was the entire investigation anybody ever conducted into the matter. I probably thought about them for a week. Then school started, and there was a boy with a Ford, and the file drawers shut the way file drawers do when you are young, and everything in the world is still ahead of you instead of circling back. The drive-in came down in '69, and I cried a little, and then I bought in over the years to what replaced it. And by '86, the diner on that lot was mine, booths where the stalls used to be, pie case by the register, the old neon script retired to the back wall where it hangs to this day, dead and pink and beloved. I raised my daughter in that diner. I turned 45 in it. 28 years of tickets between one June and one Tuesday, and I want you to feel the size of that, because I am about to tell you about the Tuesday. Slow hour, middle of the afternoon, my daughter gone to the bank with the deposit, one regular at my counter, a retired postman who collects coins and nurses coffee like it is a career. I came out of the walk-in with a tub of sliced tomatoes, and there were 2 men in the corner booth, which was wrong in a way my body knew before my head did, because I had not heard the chime. My chime is a good chime. It caught my daughter sneaking in at 16, and it catches the health inspector every quarter, and it had not made a sound. And there they sat, hats off now, in a booth I had walked past not a minute before. My first read was funeral home. There is one across the lot, and dark suits at 3 o'clock usually mean a family making arrangements who need coffee and quiet, and I have a face I put on for that trade, and I had it half on when the shorter one looked up and said, "The same order, please." And the crows landed. That is the only way I know to say it. 2 crows on a fence rail looking at a sunset, the whole little picture, surfacing after 28 years like a coin coming up out of a pond, and my hand had written 2 coffees, peach, on the pad, before I had consciously remembered one thing. My own gift ran ahead of me, and I stood there reading my own handwriting like it was somebody else's, and then I looked at them. Really looked. I was 17 when they were maybe 40. I was 45 now, and they were still maybe 40. And I do not mean well kept. I run a diner, I see well kept 40, and hard 40, and lying about at 40 every day of my life. This was the same maybe 40, the identical item, down to a habit I had filed without knowing I filed it. The taller one setting his hat crown down on the seat beside him. Just so, the way he had set it on the sedan's back seat when I hooked the tray. The suits were dark, and pressed and out of style by about 10 years, and here is the part I chewed on later. They had been out of style by about 10 years in '58 too. Different decade, same distance. Like the calendar was a road, they were walking a fixed ways behind the rest of us. Now, I am an Oklahoma businesswoman, and I do not go to pieces in my own establishment. And my brain did what brains do, it handed me an answer. Costume. There was a '50s revival night at the ballroom over on Peoria that month. The whole town had been in poodle skirts and pomade for weeks, and these 2 had committed to the bit. Car to cufflinks. That was my answer, and I poured coffee on top of it, and it held. It truly held, right up until I set the cups down and the pie between them and saw, close up, that no barber in 1986 cuts hair like that, and no costume gets the hands right. I could not tell you then what was wrong with the hands. I have had years to think, and the nearest I come is this. The hands were like the coffee cups, full, warm, and not being used. I went back behind my counter and I will tell you what the room was doing, because the room matters. The pie case hummed and made every pie look like a postcard of itself. The walk-in door breathed its little breath of winter when the compressor cycled. My postman stirred his coffee, which he does not drink so much as a company. The afternoon sun came through the front glass and laid the window lettering across the floor backward, the way it has every clear afternoon of my working life. An ordinary room is what I am saying. My room. And in the corner of it sat 28 years ago, folding its hands. They did not touch the order, either time, either century. The coffee stood, the pie kept its point. They talked low, hands folded, and it was not English, and it was not quite anything else either. Just the sound of talk with the words sanded off, and I refilled my postman and wiped things that were clean, and kept my sightline the way a woman alone in her business keeps a sightline. And they rose, while my back was half turned. The money was already on the table, and the shorter one stopped at the register, not to pay, and said to me, in the voice I had been hearing at the back of June evenings for 28 years, "Thank you for remembering." And then he said the other thing. Soft, unhurried, like a man leaving change he owes. It was not the fairgrounds, by the way. You may tell them that, if anyone should ask. Nobody had asked me anything in 28 years. Nobody has asked me anything since. I stood at my own register holding a coffee pot while the two of them went out my door, and the chime, which catches the wind, which catches the health inspector, said nothing at all. And by the time I got my hip around the counter, the lot was just a lot. Heat, shimmer, and parked cars. None of them dark, none of them formal. Nothing pulling out onto Admiral either direction. Gone the way a picture is gone when you turn the page. The tip was on the table. 2 quarters, shining. My postman, being a coin man, picked one up out of pure habit, the way another man reads any newspaper lying face up, and he turned it under the counter light and got still, and then he turned the other one and he said, "Levon, these are both 58, silver, uncirculated, or near as never mind." And then he said the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything I saw with my own eyes that day. He said, "Where'd these spend the meantime?" Because a coin that circulates wears, and a coin that sits in a collector's book stays home. These two had done neither. They had come back bright out of somewhere that was not a pocket and was not a book. 28 years with no meantime on them at all. I taped them to an index card that night, and the card lives by my register still. And there is nothing written on it because anything I wrote would be a thing I would have to explain. The pie went back in the case. My daughter ate the slice it close and said it was fine, and it was fine. That is the other thing I would want you to take to sleep with you, out of my chapter of this. Nothing was hurt, nothing was even unkind. The whole visit, both visits, my whole account of a lifetime of this, is 2 coffees nobody drank, and a thank you I earned 17 years before I understood the job. I still work my register on Sundays, though my daughter runs the floor now and runs it better than I did. But when a man in a dark suit takes a booth, any man, any suit, I catch my mind doing the old thing unbidden, filing his face by what he eats, making the little picture, setting it somewhere safe where 28 years could not shake it loose, just in case it is wanted. Maybe they were somebody's sons, driving daddy's car, keeping daddy's appointments, with daddy's manners. That is what I tell the postman when he brings it up, and he lets me have it, and neither of us believes me. But then again, maybe not. There's a jar of honey on my shelf that is 37 years old, and it pours tonight like the day I drew it, and 2 men came back for its brothers across all that time in the same suits, with the same words, and I sold them a jar and watched them walk down my lane, and my dog watched too, calm as Sunday, which I minded more than barking. My name's Wofford, and I kept bees in Gilmer County, Georgia, in the Blue Ridge foothills, for the better part of 50 years, and I will tell this slow, because that is my speed, and it was theirs. First the bees, so you know what my word is worth. Bees do not lie about hours. A hive is a clock that makes honey, and a man who tends 30 such clocks gets kept honest whether he likes it or not. They fly when the temperature says fly. They come home when the light says come home. When I tell you what time a thing happened, it is because the bees told me first, and in 50 years of keeping I saw them break their own law twice. 2 nights, 37 years apart. That is the story, and the men are the story. And I am not fully sure those are 2 different things. My yard sat a mile up a red clay lane, white supers in rows, sourwood on the ridge above, and a honey house of unpainted pine where I bottled. My father kept bees before me, and he left me one rule I have kept my whole life, which is that a man saves back 1 jar of every year's crop. You judge a season by tasting it against the last, he said. So the honey house has a shelf, and the shelf has a row of jars going back to Truman, each lid marked with its year in grease pencil. And that shelf matters more to this story than I understood for a long time. August of 1957. I was 30 years old. Near midnight, I woke for no reason I could name, and went up the lane with the flashlight, the way a man checks on his stock when his body tells him to, and I found every hive in that yard with its bees out on the landing boards, out on the fronts, thousands of them, and not one wing moving. Not fanning, which is the work bees do on a hot night. Still. And every bee, so far as my light could show me, faced the same way. Toward the ridge, like a congregation that has stood up and turned and is waiting on something to come over the hill. I stood in my own yard the better part of an hour, and along about 1 o'clock they went in all together, easy, like a breath let out, and the night was just a night again. I told nobody. A man who says his bees stood at attention buys himself a reputation, and honey does not sell better with a reputation on it. The next evening, 2 men came walking up my lane. On foot, hear me, a mile of red clay from the county road, in August, in Georgia, in dark wool suits, and not a wilt on either of them. Not a dust ring on a cuff. My clay holds a footprint a week in dry weather. I looked after, because looking is free. The lane held nothing, but that is after. At the time, they came up out of the dusk with their hats in place and their manners out of some older year, roundabout and gentle, and my dog, who announced the feed truck, the preacher, and every possum in the county, lay right where he was with his chin on his paws and let them come. They wanted honey. Well, that is what my sign at the road said, and I sold them 1 jar of the new sourwood, and the shorter one paid in bills that looked ironed. And while I made change, he asked me, mild as asking after a crop, whether my bees had been keeping their hours. Their hours, not making good honey, not behaving. Keeping their hours. And I heard myself say, near as I recall, that bees generally kept better hours than the man who kept them, which is the kind of thing you say at a roadside when you have decided not to understand a question. He smiled the amount that men like that smile, which is barely, and then he said the other thing, the way you might mention a fence needing mending. He said he would be obliged if I did not trouble the extension office about anything the bees might take a notion to do. Offices, he said, only muddle such things. Now, I had not said 1 word about my night. Hold that. I have held it 37 years. And the taller one, who had not spoken at all, took up the jar I had sold them and lifted it against the last light over the ridge, the way a man candles an egg, tilted just so, 3 seconds, and looked through the amber at the sun the way I have seen priests look at things, and set it down again and said, "We would like a jar of this year's when we come back." And they thanked me and walked down my lane into the dusk, and the dog watched them the whole way with his chin on his paws, entirely calm, and the yard, which was still flying its last shift, flew around them. That is a thing I noticed square standing there, and it is the thing I have never once been able to file. In a working yard in August, somebody is always wearing a bee. On the veil, on the sleeve, drinking your sweat off your neck. Everybody who ever came up that lane went away decorated. In the whole of that visit, no bee lit on either man. The air bent its traffic around those two suits the way a river runs around a bridge piling, and no bee will tell me why. Well, years. You know now how this goes. You have been listening all night. I kept my bees. I kept my father's rule, 1 jar back every year, grease pencil on the lid. I married Adela, who sold my honey at the church bazaar with labels she was proud of, and buried 2 dogs and raised a 3rd, and the ridge went blue and black and blue again some 13,000 times, and no bee ever again stood out at midnight, and mostly I stopped waiting for it. Mostly. A man who has seen a congregation stand up once keeps half an eye on the pews the rest of his life, I suppose. August the 9th, 1994. I was 67, and I woke at midnight for no reason I could name, and my feet had me in my boots before my head had a vote, and I went up the lane with the flashlight and the bees were out. Silent, not fanning. Faced at the ridge, every hive, my light going down the row of white boxes and finding every congregation standing, turned, waiting. Identical. I do not mean similar, I mean identical, 37 years folded shut like a chair. I stood there and I had one theory, and it was the same theory I had been keeping oiled since 57. A front coming. Some pressure thing. Bees feel weather long before the radio owns up to it. And I stood in the theory the way you stand in a dry doorway watching rain, and at 1 o'clock the bees went in, all together, easy, and I walked down to the house and sat in the kitchen with the light off until it got gray, because I knew. I will not dress it up. I knew what the next evening was going to bring up my lane, the way you know the second verse of a hymn. Shoes on the clay near dusk. 2 men. The dog, 3 dogs since the first dog, stood up, and my heart went with him. I will confess it, I wanted that bark like you want rain in a dry June. He did not bark. He lay back down with his chin on his paws and watched, calm as Sunday, and something in me minded that worse than anything, because a dog that barks is a dog with an opinion, and a dog gone quiet like that is a dog that has been answered somehow, and nobody answered me. The suits were the suits. I was a young man when I saw them first, and I thought old-fashioned. I was an old man now, and I looked at the same cut, the same wool, the same distance behind the times. A distance that had traveled forward 37 years without closing, and I did my arithmetic in the yard with the smoker hanging cold in my hand, because the yard needed no smoke. The yard was working around those 2 men like they were weather that did not apply to bees. I had my comfortable theory ready, of course. Extension men, after all, or the sons of whoever the first pair had been. State offices breed in pairs and dress a decade behind, always have, my daddy said so before me. And the theory fed me for the length of the walk to the honey house door, and I was composing some polite question about soil samples when the shorter one said, in the exact voice, with the exact words, a jar of this year's, if it is convenient. Not words like those words. Those words. I have said them to myself for 37 years, the way you keep a stone in your pocket, and I know their faces the way I know my own gate latch. and I went in and took a jar of that summer's sourwood off the bench, and the taller one took it and lifted it against the last light over the ridge, tilted just so. 3 seconds. The identical gesture, like a strip of film I had watched in 57 threaded through the projector again. And the light came through the amber the same, and my knees told me things my head was refusing to sign for. He paid. Ironed bills. And as they made to go, the shorter one looked out at my hives in the dusk, all of them working their last ordinary shift, and said kindly, "The way a man closes a ledger, the bees keep good hours." And down my lane they went, and the dog watched them the whole way, and the clay took no print, and I stood in my yard until the ridge went black. Inside, by the shelf light, I did a thing I had not done in years. I read the whole shelf, lid by lid, every year in grease pencil, tasting nothing, just reading, the way you walk a graveyard reading names. And that is when the 57 jar caught me. Every jar of honey on this earth crystallizes in its turn. Sugar goes to sugar. The 61 had sugared by 64. The clover years go fast, the sourwood years slower, but they all go. 40-odd jars on that shelf, and every one of them set up solid in its time, cloudy and stiff, the way honey does and ought to. The 57 jar is clear, liquid, amber as the evening I drew it. 37 Georgia summers deep on a pine shelf, and I tipped it once, that night to be sure, and it moved like this year's, and I set it back down, and I have not touched it since. It has its place on the shelf, and it keeps it. Idella asked me once, late on, why I never opened that one, and I told her some jars are for tasting and some are for knowing, and she let me alone about it, being the kind of woman who knows which questions have floors under them. I still robbed my hives every August while my back allowed, and the nephew who has the yard now humors me and keeps the rule, 1 jar back, grease pencil, every year. The shelf runs right up to the present, and I will tell you how I live with all of it, because that is what this hour of the night is for. There has not been a third night, not yet, but if I wake sometime with no reason I can name, and my boots find my feet, and the light going down the row shows me the congregation standing, I know already what I will do. I will not sleep, and I will not write anybody, and the next evening I will sit on my porch with the jar money in my shirt pocket, listening for shoes on the lane. Maybe honey keeps however it pleases, and I never had the schooling to know, and maybe state men dress alike in every generation. But then again, maybe not. I owed 2 men $1.35 for 35 years, and they came back for it at 3 o'clock in the morning in my last week on the bridge, and I counted it into the tray with steady hands. And then they walked toward a gate that has been chained shut since 1970, and that is where my story stops being a story about money. My name's Frida. From 1946 until they automated my booth out from under me, I collected tolls on the Ohio River Bridge at Parkersburg, West Virginia, and I will tell you about my drawer before I tell you about my men, because the drawer is my credentials. 35 years of other people's money came through my window, and my drawer never once came up short. Not a nickel, not a penny, not one time. They kept the tallies, the tollway did, and when I retired they framed one and gave it to me at the supper, and it hangs in my hall. And I mention it not to brag, but so you will understand that I am a woman who counts, and a woman who counts does not misremember a sum. Certainly not that sum. I could no more forget $1.35 than I could forget my own name, and you will see why. The booth sat mid-river practically. 2 lanes, coin trays, glass that fogged in February, and under everything, all night, every night, the river running black and wide with the barge lights going up and down it like slow stars. The walkway on the bridge was steel grid and steel grid rings. Every shoe that ever crossed that bridge announced itself, and after enough years I could call a man's weight blind from inside the booth. And up under the deck lived the pigeons, hundreds, and they flushed for every footstep like the bridge's own doorbell, a soft thunder under your feet. Keep the pigeons. You will need them. The other thing to keep is the countback, because it is the spine of everything. The man who trained me, my first week, 1946, said, "Girl, you count change aloud into the tray. Smallest coin up every time, so both parties hear the arithmetic." And I did it his way for 35 years, 10, 25, 35, and a dollar makes whatever it makes out loud, world without end. And I kept one more habit that was mine alone. Any odd sum, anything owed or hanging, I penciled small on the booth's window frame. Soft lead, my own little ledger of irregularities. The frame was my second book, and the tollway never knew it was keeping one. February of 1946. I was 22, on the graveyard shift, the relief man asleep in the shack the way God and the schedule intended. One car through maybe every 20 minutes. 3 o'clock, and the grid rang. Footsteps, and I want you to hear it the way I heard it, because nobody crossed that bridge on foot at 3 in the morning. Drunks, twice a year, weaving music. This was 2 sets of shoes even, matched, unhurried as church. Out of the dark, into the sodium light came 2 men in overcoats and hats, walking my bridge like a Sunday sidewalk, and they stopped at my window and wished me good morning. In February, at 3, with the courtesy of some year before my time. Pedestrian toll was a nickel each. The taller one offered me a bill too big for any drawer on that river at that hour. I had his 10 cents, and I did not have his change, not until the day drawer came on at 6, and I said so, embarrassed the way you are at 22. I owed them $1.35, and the shorter one said, and his voice has lived in my ear rent-free ever since, unbothered, courteous, final, next time. And they walked on. Toward Ohio, into the dark, past the light, and the grid rang under them until it didn't. And here's the first thing that was wrong, though I filed it sideways at the time. The pigeons sat. The whole soft thunder of that bridge, the doorbell that never once failed to go off under a footstep in all my years, sat silent under 2 grown men in overcoats. I told myself the cold had the birds huddled stupid. February will let you believe things like that. And I penciled on the frame, small, 135, because the frame was where hanging sums lived. And I went back to my radio and the river ran on. The bill I turned in with the drawer, and for 1 week I could have told you every particular of it, and then it was just money gone downstream into the tollway's books, the way money goes. But the sum stayed penciled, and I will be honest with you, it stayed penciled long after it stopped being bookkeeping. It grew up into a joke, then into a story I told at Christmas parties, the nickel men, and then into something I did not tell anymore and did not erase either. Booths got repainted around it. I stood in front of that penciling with my body when the painters came and told them the frame was original equipment, and they laughed and left it, and no one ever asked me why. 35 years, that sum rode my window frame like a splinter under the bridge's skin. The years themselves you can guess at. Coal trucks gave over to seniors in sedans headed for the mall. The kerosene heater gave over to an electric one that hummed a different note. My husband passed, and the bridge got me through it, because a shift is a rope you can hold. And in June of 1981, they told me the booth was going to baskets and machines. And my last week was posted on a card by the schedule, the way everything on that bridge was posted. And I was 57 years old. And I believed my story was over, and I was down to counting shifts the way you count the last beads on a string. You should know what 3 in the morning is out there before I put the men back into it. The fog comes up off the water some nights, and the barge tows talk through it in horn code, long and short, pilot to pilot, a language I never learned and never needed to. It was just the river thinking out loud. The coin tray's brass wore bright at the near edge where 35 years of my hand had ridden it. The heater ticked. A car every 20 minutes, a pair of headlights growing, a window rolling down, a face for 3 seconds, and then the river had the night back. It is the loneliest job in the world, and it is not lonely at all, and I would give a good deal for one more shift of it, even now, even knowing which shift my memory would hand me. Tuesday of that last week, 3 o'clock in the morning. The grid rang. 2 sets of shoes, even, matched, unhurried as church. I want to tell you exactly what I did because I am proud of it. I put my hand on the flashlight the way I did for drunks, and I put my other hand flat on the drawer, the way I did for nobody, and I watched the dark at the edge of the sodium light the way you watch a curtain you know is about to move. And out of it came 2 men in overcoats and hats in June. And the overcoats were not warm-looking and not cold-looking. They were simply correct, the way a photograph is correct, and they stopped at my window, and the shorter one wished me good morning. 35 years of faces had come through that window. Tens of thousands, and I was good with them. A face at a toll window is 3 seconds, and I made a study of my 3 seconds. These 2 I filed, found, and returned before the good morning finished landing. The nickel men, not sons of, not resembling. The same, and I will give you the particular that closed my case and opened the other one. In 46, the taller one's overcoat had a button hanging by its thread, second from the top, the kind of thing a woman at a window notices and a wife would have fixed. Hanging by the same thread. The identical amount of hanging. 35 years. And that thread had not finished its work, and nobody had sewn it. And there it swung, 2 feet from my glass, keeping its own appointment. My mind, being a practical mind, offered me a prank. Retirement week, the maintenance boys knew the Nickelman's story. Everybody knew it. I had told it myself at every Christmas party since Truman, and hiring 2 fellows and 2 old coats would be exactly the kind of thing that crew would pass a hat for. It was a good theory, and I honor it still. And I had the laugh half built on my face, and then the shorter man spoke, and what he said was, "We have come for the change, if it is convenient." Not, "we owe." Not, do you recall, "We have come for the change." The way you finish an errand. And the laugh I had half built went wherever such things go, and something older than the bridge came and stood quietly in the booth with me, and I will tell you what I did, because it is the whole of what I had. I opened the drawer and I counted. The drawer had it to the penny, because the universe keeps its own books, I suppose. And my mouth did the count back, smallest up, steady, aloud, the way a man dead since Korea taught a girl in 1946. 10, 25, 35, and $1 makes 135. My voice did not shake. I have wondered since whether that hurt them somehow, whether steadiness is a coin where they come from, and whether I overpaid. The shorter one took the coins up out of the tray one at a time, unhurried, and he said, "Much obliged," and it sounded like a phrase learned the year the bridge was built, and it may have been. And they walked on, toward Ohio. And here is where I need you to be awake, or half awake will do. The pedestrian gate on the Ohio end had been chained since 1970. 11 years chained, a chain and a padlock. The maintenance man checked on his rounds and logged, because everything on that bridge got logged. The grid rang under them, even, matched, going away, and the ringing passed the middle of the span, and went on, and thinned the way it thins, and I stood half out of my booth watching 2 hats go along the walkway lights toward a gate that does not open. No gate sound. A chained gate is a loud instrument, and the night was quiet enough to hear the river seams. Nothing. And no figures on the far span under the lights, and the far span is lit the whole way. Between one lamp and the next, near as I can tell you, my nickel men stopped being on my bridge. The pigeons never flushed. Not when they came, not when they went. Hundreds of birds that thunder for a paper cup rolling. Both nights, 35 years apart, that doorbell declined to ring, and no one will ever convince me the birds did not know something I did not, and were not saying. The relief man walked the deck at 4 with his thermos, the way he always did, and passed the spot and noticed nothing. And to this day, when he sees me at the grocery, he teases me that I invented my whole last week to make retirement interesting. He says it fond, I let him have it. A man who slept through the middle of the 20th century's strangest toll transaction has a right to his comforts. Before I went home that morning, I did the last bookkeeping of my career. I found the penciling on the frame, 135, soft lead, 35 years old, my own young hand. And under it, I wrote one word: paid. 2 years later, they tore the booths out for the baskets, and I asked a maintenance man for that frame board, and he thought it was an old woman's sentiment, and he cut it out with a handsaw and gave it to me, and it is in my hall closet leaning next to the framed tally, and he was right, it is sentiment. Mostly. I took a house up on the hill, well away from the water because I had earned dry land. But a body keeps its shift hours, they say, and most nights I wake at 3, clean awake, like a bell struck once, and I lie there in a quiet house a mile from the river, listening for footsteps on a steel deck that is 30 years gone. Maybe that is just what a working life does to a woman, winds her to an hour and leaves her wound, but then again, maybe not. A man asked me half a question in 1952, and a horn cut him off, and he came back in 1971 and said the other half as though the horn had just now finished sounding. My name's Milo. I tended a lock on the Illinois River below Ottawa for 22 years, nights mostly, and I will give this to you in river order, upstream to down, because that is the only order I trust. The lock first. A lock at night is gauge lights, green and red, doubling themselves on black water. It is the smell of diesel and wet concrete. It is the gates, and the gates are the part you need, so bear with a tradesman for a minute. A miter gate weeps, they all do, hundreds of tons of steel and timber holding back a pool, and the water finds the seams. And every gate's seep has a voice. A trickle here, a chuckle there, a flat note where the packing has gone home. I walked my wall every shift and read them with my ears, and when a gate's song changed, I repacked it, hemp driven in with a caulking iron until the note came true. 22 years of that will tune a man. I knew every gate on that wall the way a piano man knows his wires, and I say so not to brag, but because you are going to need to believe my ears. 2 things more. My log, where everything on that river got a line, every tow, every stage, every fool thing, because the district ran on lines and logs, and my dog, Duchess, a black and tan who worked nights with me and slept on the warm generator housing, and who I will ask you to remember, because they remembered her. October of 1952, near midnight. Fog walking the pool at walking pace. No tow due for 2 hours. 2 nights before, I had seen a thing I had not logged, and I will confess it here the way I never confessed it to the district. A light had gone up the river, under the water. Bright enough to make the pool glow green-white over it, moving upstream at a steady walk against current that would have argued with anything honest, and it passed under my wall and up the pool and was gone, and I stood there with my coffee not drinking it, and then I went in, and I did not write the line. I made a dot. A small pencil dot in the margin of that day, which was my own private mark, known to nobody, meaning I saw what I saw. A man half believes a thing more comfortably when the record half says it. That was my arrangement with myself, and I kept it, and you are one of maybe 2 living souls who knows what the dot in that book means. So, midnight, fog, my walk. I came out of the lock house with Duchess at my knee, and there were 2 men standing on my lock wall. I want you to understand what I'm saying. That wall has 2 ways onto it. By boat, through the chamber, or through the yard, and the yard gate wore a padlock whose 1 key rode my belt, and I am a man who checks padlocks the way other men check their watch. No boat in the chamber. No boat on the pool. The fog held everything close, and I would have heard oars, and God knows I would have heard an engine. And there they stood on the wet stones in dark suits and hats, dry shoes on a wall that had not been dry since Labor Day, waiting for me the way men wait who have made an appointment you have not. They were courteous. I have thought hard about their courtesy, and the nearest I can put it, it was the courtesy of an older year, roundabout, unhurried, the kind that makes you stand straighter without being asked. The shorter one asked after the river, her stage, her current, when she ran lowest, easy questions a tradesman half enjoys answering. And I answered, the way you talk to inspectors, and all the while, Duchess sat at my knee with her ears soft, wagging that 1 slow wag she kept for men she already knew. She had never seen these men. I would stake my pension. But that is how she sat. Then the shorter one said, mild as the fog, that he understood there had been a light going up the river 2 nights back, under the water, and that it would be simplest if it stayed out of the log. It was already out of the log. I had told no one. There was a dot in a margin in a locked drawer in the lock house, and there were 2 men on my unreachable wall saying, in their roundabout way, that they knew what the dot knew. I said nothing, which they took, I believe, as the answer it was. And then the taller one, who had not spoken, began, and I will give you his words exact, because I have kept them 22 years the way I kept my father's watch. He said, and which gate? 3 words in, the bend signal blew. 1 long, the midnight tow announcing herself above the lock, and 20 years of horns will turn a man's head whether he votes on it or not. I turned. The fog held the tows light like a lamp behind a bedsheet, and I turned back to say I would need a minute, and the wall was wet stone and fog and nobody. Duchess was looking at the empty place. Not alarmed, looking the way she looked at me when I went in to fetch my coffee, the look a dog gives a person who has stepped out and will be back. Then she wagged once and lay down on the cold stone, and I worked the midnight tow through with my hands doing the job by themselves, and that is the truthful end of the first half. No boat had come. No gate had opened. My padlock was fast, and I checked it twice, and the second check was not procedure, it was need. And which gate? What about which gate? Which gate what? I turned those 3 words over for 19 years, the way you turn a key found in a drawer, trying doors with it. I finished the question 100 ways, and none of my endings sat flat. And there's a particular loneliness in polishing half a sentence for 19 years, like a monk at his beads, with nobody to tell that you are doing it or why. 19 years is a working life's middle. The district modernized things and unmodernized others. Duchess worked her nights on the generator housing until her muzzle went gray, and she died in the spring of '63, of nothing but years, in a spot of sun by the lockhouse door, and I buried her above the flood line and told the relief man the wind was in my eyes, and he had the decency to believe me. I got a new radio in the lockhouse, then a newer one. My knees began to file grievances. The river ran. March of 1971, an afternoon, sun on the pool, no tow for 2 hours, and I was walking my wall with my ears the way I always walked it, when the light on the downstream end changed. I have no better words for it. The quality of the light changed, the way it does when a cloud crosses, and there was no cloud. And I looked up, and the two men were standing on my wall. Same stones, same suits, and I mean the same distance out of date, which in 1952 had been a decade behind that year, and in 1971 was a decade behind this one. And I have done that arithmetic on a log sheet, literally, pencil and paper, and it does not come out, and I invite you to try it while you drift off. It is a good problem to fail at. My first theory came instantly, and I was glad to see it. District engineers. The office ran men in pairs, always had, and 52's pair had been district men too, and the paperwork had simply never caught up to me, which would make it the first paperwork in history to miss a lock tender. I had the log line half composed in my head. 2 engineers, gate inquiry, and I was reaching for the professional face a man keeps on a nail by the door, and the taller one looked at me and did not say, "Good afternoon," and did not say, "Do you remember us?" and said, "You never said which gate," as if the horn had just now finished, as if 19 years were a pause for a passing tow. And here is the thing I am least able to explain to you, and the thing I am surest of. I answered him. Immediately, completely. My mouth opened, and 19 years of an unanswered question came out of it level as a gauge reading, and I heard myself say, "The lower miter, Riverside. She sings flat when the pool drops, always has. The packing never held on that seam." Because that was the answer. I had known which gate since before they asked. That is what my ears were for, and the question had stood open on that wall for 19 years, like a gate on its chain, and when it finally swung shut, my own voice was the sound it made, and I have wondered every night since what use my answer was, and to whom, and for what, and I would be lying if I said no part of me was proud of how promptly I gave it. A tradesman is a tradesman all the way down. The taller one nodded, the way engineers nod, one dip, information received. And then he looked at the lockhouse door, at the generator housing, at the exact warm spot on it, and asked, "Is Duchess keeping well?" She was 8 years dead, and before my face could even begin the work of saying so, the shorter one spoke, mildly, the way you note a slipped calendar page, of course. "It has been some time. It has been some time. 19 years, a war ended and another begun, my knees, my gray, a good dog's whole life from pup to the floodline. Inside a phrase a man uses for a fortnight." That was the moment I understood, not with my head came along later, but the way you understand a gate by its song, that whatever those two were keeping their appointments by, it was not my calendar. Their sometime and my sometime were different instruments, and mine was the one wearing out. The shorter one thanked me for my answer as though it had been given promptly, which I suppose by one reckoning it had. And then a heron I had been half watching on the guide wall did not startle, and the gauge lights flickered the way they flicker when a cloud crosses, and there was no cloud. And I was alone on my wall, no splash, no boat, no gate. My padlock was fast. I checked it once and made myself not check it again, and that is the only discipline I am truly proud of from that whole afternoon. I logged the tow that came at 4. I logged the stage. I added no other line, but that October I repacked the lower miter on my own time, Riverside, hemp driven home until the song came true, and when it was done I stood on my wall in the cold with my iron in my hand, and I considered that the wall now owed nobody an answer, and I found that I slept better after, which you may make of what you like. I stayed on the river till the pension took me, and these days, on the public days when the district lets folks up on the wall, I go. And I stand where they stood, and children ask me questions about the lock, and here is what is left of all of it in me. I answer them completely. Every question, all the way to the end, the first time. The time of day, the depth of the chamber, why the gates meet at an angle. No half answers. Nothing left open on the wall. Maybe the district really did send men out in 52 and the file just never surfaced, files being files. But then again, maybe not. There is a photograph that hung on a wall 6 feet from my elbow for 16 years, and I never saw what was in it until the night the 2 men in it came back for their tickets. My name's Twyla. I sold bus tickets in Amarillo, Texas, for the better part of my working life, behind the window of a depot with a terrazzo floor and oak benches and a schedule board whose letters clacked over like slow applause every time a departure came or went. And I will tell you up front the kind of witness I make. 400 tickets a day through my window at the peak of it. I could stamp, count change, and spot a forged pass without losing the sentence I was in. Faces were my trade as much as tickets were. 16 years of drunks, runaways, soldiers, and preachers taught me to be unsurprisable, and I would have told you I was unsurprisable, and I did used to tell people that. I say it differently now. The depot matters, so give me a minute of it. Diesel and floor polish, that is the smell, and the heat pressing at the glass doors all summer wanting in. The terrazzo announced every boot heel from 40 feet, so a ticket seller never looked up surprised. The benches held their sleepers. The shoeshine man kept his own schedule. And the announcer's voice had said the 215 eastbound so many thousand times it had worn a groove in the air. And on the wall by the office door hung the depot's photographs, going back decades. The way railroad and bus people keep their history, framed and dusted, and never once looked at. The newest of them, in my years, was from June of 1966, the depot's 40th anniversary. Ribbon across the doors, the mayor, bunting. A crowd of maybe 80 faces squinting into the sun. I hung that photograph myself in 67. Drove the nail. Remember that I drove the nail. One more piece of furniture. Under my cash drawer, taped to the underside of the counter, lived an envelope. Every window has one, or had, wherever held things went, the items waiting on somebody. Unclaimed layaway tickets, a soldier's watch left as surety, notes for passengers that never came. The counter was remodeled 3 times in my years, and 3 times I peeled that envelope off the old wood and taped it under the new, myself, because a place where held things live has to move whole, or something is lost. You will see where this is going. Half of my stories live in that envelope. June of 1966, anniversary week, the bunting still up inside, and I was 28, and 2 men came to my window. Dark suits, hats, and a courtesy with dust on it. The kind of manners that made you sit up straighter on your stool without being asked. 2 one-way tickets to Clovis, New Mexico, on the 215. Paid exact, and I mean exact, the coins counted onto my tray like a man laying out surgical tools. I stamped the forms, tore them right, slid them under the glass. And then the shorter one, instead of taking them up, said that they found they could not travel today after all. And would I hold the tickets? Not refund, hold. For our return, he said, in a voice like the inside of a bank vault. And something in the phrasing sat wrong and polite at the same time, the way a perfectly folded map of some place you have never been sits on a table. I held things for a living. I sleeved the tickets, marked the sleeve, and taped the envelope back under the drawer, and the 215 left on time with 2 empty seats I had sold, and if you had asked me a month later, I could not have told you about it, because a depot eats its own days. The only reason the day survived at all was the sleeve in the envelope, riding under my drawer through the years like a seed under a floorboard. 16 years. The counter was remodeled twice more, and twice more I moved the envelope with my own hands, and both times I saw the Clovis sleeve in there and thought, Someday I will turn those in, and both times I taped it all back under the new wood instead, because held is held. The fare changed. The forms changed twice. The old style discontinued, then its replacement discontinued. Drivers came and went, except Bascom Tutt, who drove the 215 the whole era and rejected tickets for a smudge, for a bent corner, for existing. A man who ran his coach like a courtroom. My hair went from brown to what my daughter calls honest. That is what 16 years is at a bus depot. It is fares and forms and floor wax, and it happened to all of us. I need you to hold that sentence again, the way you have held it all night. It happened to all of us. Keep holding. A Tuesday in March of 1982, the dead middle of the afternoon. Waiting room down to a sleeping soldier and a woman with a bird cage, the cover on, the parakeet making its one remark every minute or so. The manager at lunch, Bascom out at the bay with the 215. I was doing the tally sheet, and I looked up, and the two men were at my window. The terrazzo had said nothing. That floor announced everybody. It was the depot's own doorbell, and I had heard the soldiers snore and the parakeet philosophize, and not one boot heel, and there they were, hats and all, filling my window like they had been developed there. And my first thought, I will confess it, arrived wearing a uniform. Inspectors. The region had been warning us about spot audits all spring, and region men dressed 10 years behind and traveled in pairs since the beginning of time. It is a measure of how good that theory felt that I smiled my audit smile, the one that costs the face so much by 5 o'clock, and asked how I could help them. The shorter one said, "We believe you are holding something of ours." And my hand was under the drawer before my mind had agreed to anything. That is the part I would want a jury to understand. 16 years, 3 remodels, and my hand went to the envelope like a bird going to the one nest, and came up with the sleeve, and I looked at my own marking on it, June of '66, and I want to say the depot got quiet then. But the truth is the depot was already quiet, and what got quiet was me. 2 one-way tickets to Clovis, the old form, the dead fare, my stamp, my tier. I slid them under the glass with 16 years of tape shadow on the sleeve, and the shorter one thanked me, and I looked at them then, really looked, with my trade eyes, the ones that were never once wrong about a face in 16 years. I was 28 when they were maybe 45. I was 44 now. They were still maybe 45, and it was the same maybe 45. And I know what 16 years does to a face because I had watched it do its work on every regular at that window and on the glass's own reflection of me. It had done nothing to them. Nothing, if you will let me say it the way I said it to myself that night. Not spared them, skipped them. And their suits were dark and pressed and about a decade out of style. And I had the strangest bookkeeping thought I have ever had, which was that in '66 their suits had also been about a decade out of style, and that some accounts apparently roll forward without ever paying interest. They went and sat on the center bench to wait, hats on their knees, and I did my audit smile at my tally sheet and got not one number of it done. The 215 boarded, and Bascom Tutt, 20 years of rejecting Christendom's tickets for a smudge, took those 2 dead fare, wrong form, 16-year-old tickets, punched both without so much as a glance, and nodded those men aboard the way you nod at regulars. I watched it happen through the glass. When I asked him about it after, easy as I could, he looked at me like I had asked him about a particular cup of coffee from the spring of 1970. No memory of it. None. And the soldier who woke before the bus pulled out, and the birdcage woman and the shoeshine man, who missed nothing that crossed that floor in 40 years, every one of them. When the subject of the 2 suits came up in my careful, joking, after-hours way, gave me the same pleasant nothing. An hour on the center bench, in the middle of everybody's afternoon. and the bench sat empty in every memory but mine. The 215 pulled out on time. I watched it to the highway, the air brakes exhaling like something setting down a weight, the diesel shimmer folding over it. And that should have been the end. And if it had been the end, I might have gotten the whole thing filed under strange and moved along. The way you do. The way all of us in this hour of the night have done with something or other. It was not the end. Closing time. The board clacked itself blank for the night, letter by letter, the sound of a day being unspelled. I was walking the floor the way a depot woman walks it, checking benches for what the day forgot, and I stopped at the wall of photographs by the office door. I could not tell you why. I had passed that wall maybe 10,000 times, and I looked at the anniversary photograph, June of '66, ribbon, mayor, bunting, 80 squinting faces. The photograph I hung with my own hammer, and I found them in 4 seconds. Left edge, past the bunting. 2 men, hats on, dark suits. Standing in the crowd I had stood in myself, a 28-year-old ticket girl somewhere in that squint. 16 years that photograph hung 6 feet from my elbow. 600, maybe 1,000 times I had dusted the glass of it. And here's what I need to leave with you. The reason I never once saw them, the reason nobody sees them. And I have checked this every way a methodical woman can check a thing. Every face in that crowd is turned toward the ribbon. 80 faces. One direction, the way crowds face, because that is what a crowd is, people agreeing where to look. They are not looking at the ribbon, they are looking at the camera. Directly down the lens, out of the paper, at whoever stands in front of that photograph, which for 16 years, at a range of 6 feet, on 10,000 ordinary afternoons, had mostly been me. I stood there while the depot went fully quiet, and I looked at them looking at me, and the overhead by the office door hummed, and the parakeet was gone home with its woman. And I want to be truthful with you about what I felt, because it was not terror, and this is a night for truthful things. It was the feeling of finally being introduced, as though for 16 years I had been the one under glass, held, sleeved, taped under some drawer of theirs, and the photograph was just where they kept me between visits. I took it down that night. I put it back up the next morning because taking it down felt like signing a statement I was not prepared to sign, and it hangs there yet, or did when I retired. The empty envelope I retaped under the drawer, empty, and could not have told you why, except that a place where held things live ought to stay ready, in case something of mine is ever returned. But I will tell you what I do now, and then I will let you sleep. Every photograph that has come before my eyes since, wedding pictures, yearbooks, the newspaper, my grandbaby's school portraits, I read the edges first, before the bride, before the ribbon. I check the margins of the crowd for anyone facing the wrong way, and then I check where their eyes are pointed, and my daughter thinks it is a quirk, and I let her, because a quirk is what we call a habit whose reason we do not say at dinner. Maybe 2 men at a depot party just liked cameras, but then again, maybe not. A man called me by a name that died with my father, and he used it easily, the way you use the name you were given the last time you saw somebody. My name's Philomena, and I am 98 years old. And this is the gentlest story I know, which is why I have saved it for the end of my talking, and you may sleep in the middle of it with my blessing. Nothing in it will raise its voice. Nothing in it ever did. My people grew apples in Page County, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, and we sold them off a plank stand on the valley pike under a big winesap tree. A hanging scale, bushel baskets, the ridge close and blue to the east. I minded that stand from the time I was 8, and I will tell you what a child learns at a roadside stand. Honest weight first. You learn the scale, and then you learn to grate apples by hand in the dark of a basket, by feel. And you learn faces, because a face at a stand is your whole acquaintance with most of the world. It slows down, it buys, or it doesn't. It goes on down the pike. I was a great student of faces, having little else assigned to me. In October of 1943, I was 15. The war was on, gas was rationed, and the pike was quiet in a way roads have never been quiet since. You heard every car for a mile, and every car got looked at, and the dust it pulled up hung over the lane a long while after, like the road remembering. In those days, there was a number chalked inside our stand for the aircraft spotting post, because you reported planes. That was a child's civic pride, and I knew my silhouettes better than my psalms. One evening that October from the stand, I watched a pale light stand over the ridge. I say stand because that is what it did. Planes do not do it. It stood the way the evening star stands, but it was no star. It was below the ridgeline's shoulder, and it stayed while I weighed out apples for Mrs. Comer's boy, and it stayed while the light went cidery and long. And then I looked down to count change, and when I looked up, it was not there. Not gone over, not faded, just no longer being there, the way a thought is and then isn't. I did not ring the spotting post. It was not a plane, and a girl of 15 did not telephone grown men to say a light had stood still and then quit. I told nobody at all. Hold that, the way you have held things all night. I told nobody. The next afternoon, 2 men came up the pike on foot. On foot, in dark suits and hats, on a road where I heard every car for a mile, and there had been no car, and no dust hung over the lane behind them, and I noticed that the way a child notices, cleanly, without yet knowing it is strange. They were courteous in an old, roundabout fashion. They looked at the apples the way men look at things they are being polite about, and chose a basket of wine saps. And while I waited, my father passed behind me with a crate on his shoulder and called, "Mind the scale, Pippin," and went on into the rows. Pippin was his name for me, his only, and mine only from him. He coined it at that stand when I was small, after the apple, because I was little and sharp, he said, and sweetened late. My mother thought it undignified and never used it. No schoolmate ever heard it. It lived its whole life inside my father's voice, between the rows and the stand, and I want you to know that before I tell you the end. The shorter of the 2 men paid me exact, and then he asked so gently that it did not feel like a question from a stranger, what I had seen over the ridge the evening before. Not whether, what. And because he asked the way you ask somebody who already shares the secret, and because I was 15 and had been holding it alone for a day, which at 15 is a long time, I told him. Plainly, all of it, the standing, the not being there. He listened all the way to the end without once helping me along, which even then I knew was rare in a grown man. And when I finished, he nodded, the way you nod at a good scale, and said, "That's all we wanted to know." They took their basket and walked back down the pike, and no dust hung over the lane behind them, and my father came out of the rows and asked if the suits had paid cash, and I said yes, and that was the whole of it for 52 years. I will give you the 52 years the way the valley gives them, in one long breath of weather. The war ended. I married a Yole from the next orchard over, a good man, gone now, and the stand became our stand. The pike got paved and got loud. My father died in 1962 in January, and the name Pippin died with him. Because a name like that is not a word, it is a voice, and the voice was done. Nothing was ever in the sky again. I looked, most clear evenings from the stand, out of a habit I never named to anybody, and somewhere in those years I took up my other habit, my little private foolishness, which you may smile at. Each fall, when the first basket came up full, I would find myself composing an answer. A true, tidy answer to a question nobody had asked me since Roosevelt, in case it should ever be asked again. I polished it some Octobers. Some Octobers I only nodded to it, the way you nod to a neighbor. It was, I suppose, the one piece of unfinished business I had in this world. October of 1995. I was 67, and it was a Saturday of the kind the valley saves up all year, leaf lookers drifting the pike with out-of-state plates, the ridge going red and gold, the light like cider. Late in the afternoon the traffic thinned, and my grandson was at the far barn with his radio, and I was alone at the stand, and two men came up the pike on foot. I knew before they were close enough to know. I have wondered how, and the nearest I can come is the walk, which was even and unhurried, twinned, and the no dust, my oldest clue, faithful after 52 years. And what I felt, and I want this understood in the room where you are falling asleep, was not fear. It was not even much surprise. It was the feeling of a long open parenthesis closing, an account being walked out to the road to be settled, and my hands went on stacking wine saps while they came, and my hands were steady, and it was their steadiness that told me what I felt. The suits were the suits. The faces were the faces. I was a girl when I filed them, and a grandmother when they came back up out of the file, and they had not moved one afternoon further along, and I will not pretend that was nothing to see. It was the strangest thing I have looked at in 98 years. But strangeness is not the same as menace, whatever the night tells you, and these two carried none. They chose a basket of wine saps, the same, for all I know, the very same, and the shorter one paid me exact coin onto the plank, and then he asked, in the same gentle way, the follow-up to a conversation 52 years wide. He said, "And since then?" And 50 autumns of my little private foolishness came up out of me in 4 words. "Never again," I said. I looked. He nodded, the way you nod at a good scale, at honest weight, at an answer that balances. And then he said, "The thing I have saved for you all night." Thank you, Pippin, that's all. My father's name for me. Coined at that stand, heard by those two men exactly once, in passing, from a man 33 years dead, and it came out of the shorter one easily, currently, warm as if it had been used last Tuesday, because I suppose, in whatever ledger those two keep, it had been. They touched their hats, and they went away down the pike into the cider light, and no car came for them, and no dust hung, and 10 minutes later I weighed out half a bushel for a family from Pennsylvania with steady hands. That is all. That is the whole of it, and I am glad it is mine. Nothing was ever in the sky again, and nobody ever came again, and I sold apples on Saturdays until my hands told me to stop, and my grandson runs the stand now and calls me by my church name, and the ridge goes blue, then black, in the order ridges go, every single evening, faithful as scales. But every fall, on the morning the first basket comes up full, I catch myself doing the old thing, rehearsing a true answer, folding it small, putting it where I can reach it, the way you keep a porch light on for somebody who never wrote which year they were coming. Maybe they were only 2 polite men with long memories, and the valley made the rest, the way valleys do. But then again, maybe not.